In this lesson, we're going to learn the basics of keeping our scenes organized. Alright, so as a modeler, it's important to remember that we need to make sure that our scenes are organized and everything is named and things are grouped or parented properly. Now the reason that we want to do this is because in the CG industry, when working with 3D, whether it's for games or whether it's for film, we need to make sure that we're keeping our things organized because that's going to be moving on down through the pipeline and other people are going to be handling your files. So to get started with this, let's talk about how to name and rename objects. So I have 3 objects in here, and while this particular scene really isn't all that complex, it can really show us the importance of keeping scenes organized. So to rename a particular object, you want to select it, and you can go to your Modify panel and change the name here. So let's call this Mother Teapot, and then we'll call this one Boy Teapot, and then we'll say this one is Girl Teapot. Okay, so we've renamed these particular objects. Now, one thing that I want you to notice about the naming convention here is that I've named them descriptively. Okay, so we know what each one is as we look at it. Okay, we know or a couple of things that you want to keep in mind whenever you're renaming your objects is you don't want to use names that are extremely long or extremely confusing. So, for example, if you were to give this particular teapot a specific name with a bunch of numbers or a bunch of letters trailing off at the end, that's really not going to be helpful. Now, if it were a particular copy of a teapot, let's say that you have, let's say, 2 Mother's teapots in the scenes. What you would want to do is you might say Mother Teapot A and Mother Teapot B, or _01 or _02. Either way would be fine. Okay, so just a couple of things to be mindful of whenever naming your objects. Another thing that we would want to do whenever we are working in 3ds Max is we want to make sure that we're keeping things on layers. So for example, if I had these 3 teapots in a particular scene, so let's say that I had something like a floor object in the scene, and I had something like, I don't know, some particular object on this side, we might want to keep these in a particular layer. So I would select these objects and go to my Layers Manager, and I would add a new layer with those 2 objects selected, and let's rename it. So let's call this Environment. Okay, and let's make sure that we don't have any special characters in there. So that is now on the Environment layer. I can hide those and I can freeze those as needed right from my Layers Manager. And then I want to select my teapots, and I want to put those on their own layer. So I'm going to call this Characters. Okay, and again, this just makes it easy to hide those as needed. Now, one thing that you want to be careful of whenever you're using your layers is you want to make sure that you're working on the correct layer. So if you're adding new objects, let's say that we want to add another object to our environment, let's make sure that that is checked. Okay, and now we can add in, let's say, a cylinder here in the background. Okay, and that's now on the environment layer. So if I hide that, you'll see that that has now disappeared. Now, if you're creating something brand new for the scene, you're not necessarily creating it for the environment or the characters, you want to make sure that you're on the default layer, and that will always be there. So now that we've learned about layers, let's talk about grouping objects together and how this can be helpful. So if needed, I could select all of these objects in my environment, and I can go up to Edit and then Group. Okay, now I'm using the enhanced menus with 3ds Max, and I find that this is a little bit easier to work with as we go to these menus. They have icons next to those, and you could also hover over those particular objects, and they will give you an explanation of what that particular menu object does. So if I go to Objects, I can create primitives. Now, if you're using the default workspace, which you can just left-click and go to Enhanced here, or switch back to your default workspace, you would want to use Groups. Okay, So it would be group, and then you'll group. So let's make sure that we have those selected. Group and group. And I'm going to call this, let's say, market. Something like that. So now these objects are their own group, and you can see that they are named properly as market, and notice that the name is in bold. This is letting us know that these objects are grouped together. So just a little bit of a reference, or visual reference, or cue. We can also take a look at our layers here, and if we go to our environment and expand that out, you can see the individual objects there. Okay, and we can hide those individual objects under our layers. Okay, even though they are still grouped together. Now, grouping objects together doesn't necessarily make them one particular object. It doesn't make them one solid piece. So I can't access like the vertex mode of each individual object. I can't select the polygons. Okay, this is going to be different than using the attach, which you've seen in the geometry lesson. Okay, so this is going to be different. Now, we've talked about grouping. Let's talk about ungrouping. So if I go to Edit, Group, and Ungroup, that will get rid of that group altogether. Or I could go to Edit, Group, and Explode. Explode can be very helpful if we have nested groups. So what that looks like is if I have this group, and let's say that I attach these three to this group. So I can go to, let's select these three teapots, and I go to Edit, Group, and let's do Attach. And then I'm going to select the market group. Okay, so now all of those are part of the market group here. I can go to Edit, Group, and then Explode, and it will get rid of any groups in that. Okay. Now the last thing that I want to talk about in this lesson is parenting. Now parenting may seem like it's grouping, but it is really different. So for example, let's take the two teapots here, the boy and the girl teapot, and let's go up to Select and Link. Left clicking on that, and then if I left click and hold on my two objects as they're selected, it creates this rubber band, and it's waiting for me to drop onto the parent object. So in this case, I want to drop onto the mother teapot. So you'll see that that highlighted, and now if I move the mother teapot, the other two will follow behind. Now, what's really great about this is it allows me to have individual control over the child objects. So if I take this and I move it back here, I can do that, and still it has to move with the parent. So we still have that individual control there. Alright, so now that we've taken a look at the basics of grouping and parenting and renaming our objects and keeping things organized, we're going to move into our project. And in our next lesson, we're going to talk about how to set up reference images. So I'll see you then.